Hey everyone, welcome to the CyberHub Engage podcast. Your host, James Azar here. So if you're not following us on Patreon, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you name it, you're missing out on a lot of great content, including some of our exclusive infographics and whatnot. But CyberHub Engage podcast, we are on video again, trying to reach outside of the Atlanta and Georgia ecosystem because not everything revolves around Atlanta. And I've got Don Pecha. You're in Texas, right?
In Omaha, Nebraska now.
Omaha, Nebraska. Oh, right. We've had that conversation because I'm a Colorado boy at heart, and that is a very that is a rivalry for the ages. University of Colorado versus Nebraska. Before Nebraska, Oklahoma, it was Colorado, Nebraska always.
Yep.
So Don's going to be with us here on the show. We're going to start talking about thinking outside the box. I'm going to introduce Don immediately after this message from our sponsor, Get Smart Eye.
I want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Get Smart Eye. That's Get Smart Eye, like your eye, EYE.com. It's a new security company that's focused on your privacy. How many of you guys have eyes around watching your screens, your phones, your tablets? No matter where you are, it can be your own office, an airport, a train station, a co-working space, and even a coffee shop, right? But there's some documents and some information that really needs to stay away from prying eyes. That's where Get Smart Eye comes in. They're using the latest biometric technology to give you complete control over the documents you send and who sees them. Whether you're viewing them yourself or sending them for someone else to view them, the Get Smart Eye technology ensures that whoever's seeing it is the right person. And should someone who shouldn't see it grab a look at it, it gets the document to disappear and won't reopen it until it verifies the identity of the person you sent it to. So to get more information, go to getsmarteye.com/James. Again, that's getsmarteye.com/James. Again, getsmarteye.com/James.
So guys, Get Smart Eye does what they do, but I'm here with Don Pecha. He's in Nebraska of all places. So we have a really big global audience. So for a global audience that doesn't know where Nebraska is in the U.S., it's the heart of the Midwest. It's where Warren Buffett calls home, right? Have you ever seen Buffett? Have you ever seen Warren Buffett, Don?
I have. I used to live in his neighborhood.
Is he what everyone says he is, meaning he's friendly to everyone around and he's just another guy going through his day?
He truly is, yeah. He has his quirks, but that's good.
Yes, it is. So for those of you guys who don't know Don, and we'll share Don's social media and ways for you guys to interact with Don at the bottom of this video. He was the former VP at PayPal, and now he's helping Fortune companies and solve some of their cyber issues on an enterprise scale. He also helps small and medium-sized companies develop a holistic approach to cybersecurity, keeping them within budget. And so, Don, you were at PayPal, you left, but you kind of, your background's a little different from other people in security, right? I mean, there's people get into security from all kinds of different places, but your background really consistently has been in technology, and you've always worked on improving that. So how did that attribute to you getting into cybersecurity and understanding cyber?
Yeah, so it evolves around understanding the business. And early on, I was in technology. I was actually, this is back, say, 1998, I was actually running network servers. And when I was hired, they said, "Can you run a web server for us?" This is prior to 2000, the launch of the internet. Sure, I can do that. And as soon as I started running it, it got defaced. So I'm like, scrambling. What just happened? How did this happen? Well, I wasn't, I was versed on using desktop Windows and Mac and Unix, and this is a Windows IIS server. So get in and start to figure out Internet Information Server and what happened. And so I started looking at logs. Well, logs have been changed. So fix the site, restore the page, it gets defaced again. So over the course of a couple of weeks, I had to figure out we weren't patched. We didn't have good permissions and security. We had logs that weren't being properly maintained. And once I figured all those things out, I was able to kick them out. So now I'm a network guy, that understood security on the network, but I'm like, there's this whole other side of things around the web that really is going to blow up and no one's securing it. And having had somebody actually hack me before the web became popular, this was my opportunity to figure out what hardening looked like.
Right.
How do we harden things? And what's really important about the hardening? And in the case of what happened to me, it was blocking and tackling. We didn't have patches installed. We weren't securing our logs. We didn't have good authorization. We didn't have good account permissions. So we failed at basic security hygiene. And that's why our website was being used against us to deface it and just, make us look like we weren't professional. And this was done by an insider. So that adds a whole nother insight, to insider threat is something we really struggle with today. And with this person being an insider, how could we effectively prevent that in the future? So these were things that really came home to me and taught me to start thinking about not just doing my job and showing up and managing things, but how do I do that securely? But then you understand the business. So there are times where we would do something and it would have a negative impact on business because we're just thinking about technology. We're thinking about this patch, this update, and then the business comes back and says, whoa, something bad happened. How do we actually learn from that and know to go back, who to talk to gather the right people, to have the right conversations, to do security, but do it in a way that enables business.
You talk about, web defacing, which still in parts of the world today is very, very common. In the US, we see less and less of it within time. What year was all this going on? Because this wasn't recent. We're talking almost 10, 15 years ago, right?
Yeah, longer now. It was 98. It was really before. I didn't start web full time until 2000. So this was, early days of IIS and Apache.
Okay.
We hadn't hit Y2K yet.
This was like the pre-Y2K. I think everyone's biggest fear about Y2K was website defacement.
Mainframe code crap. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you look at that and you take web folks and you talk of cyber hygiene today, almost 20 years later. But 20 years ago, how many people, the term cybersecurity wasn't really around, right? I mean, this was more of like information. It wasn't even information security. It was IT security at best, right?
Right. Yeah.
How have you seen this evolve over the years?
So, it depends on who you're looking at. There's the hacktivists, there's the activists. So what you really have to be aware of is the IT is what's the business doing. So
Right.
If you're not aware of what M&A activity you're doing or what your CEO is going to be talking about or what the board is going to be presenting on or what your marketing department might be pitching, some of those things might strike a chord with people that would want to do you harm in a security way. That might want to embarrass you, that might want to take your business down or take it offline for a period of time. So as a technologist, you have to understand behaviors and threats and be proactive when you're hearing leadership talk about certain activities and preparing for those activities. One of the problems I think we have as an industry is we're reactive and not proactive enough.
And that seems to be a common theme. When you look at most of the industry today, I was at RSA, about a month, it's 5 weeks ago, right? I mean, more or less. And one common theme walking the floor when I wasn't podcasting and talking to folks, and you look at a lot of the security vendors that were there, almost every single one of them, and I say almost because I couldn't speak to every single vendor there. One, I didn't have the time. Number two, I definitely don't have the patience. I got a 2 vendor a day limit of how much I can take, right? And it was all reactive technology.
Right.
Nothing was really proactive, but a lot of people also confuse proactive with hackback and offensive.
Right.
How do you see that be different? I mean, what's the difference between being proactive to hacking back and offensive security?
So Proactive is, I know my network, I know where my data is, I know where the crown jewels of my data are. I know what my network should look like and how it should operate, what normal traffic is. Those are proactive steps that you take, and you baseline those and you keep watching it to see what changes over time. And then you're actively watching to see. Proactive means I'm now looking for anomalies in my network, in my traffic, in my flows. I'm looking for, in a smart way, I'm looking for alerts that stand out. I may be using some of those tools, but they're just there to alert me to the things that, frankly, are common, that are coming across, that have known signatures. I'm looking for the things that people have modified. They're going to get past those signature-based activities really fast. And proactive is being proactive on your network, not having to leave your network to to stop something. Your job is to stop it when it hits your network, or once it gets into your network, to limit the amount of activity they can do.
So we constantly hear about being proactive for what I like to call a buzzword everyone talks about, which is honeypots, right? Proactive is setting up a honeypot and letting hackers come in and understanding. And while there's nothing wrong with honeypots, because honeypots to me are a great intelligence gathering source of what people are looking to do in your network, what data they're going after. It kind of helps you understand, is my cybersecurity roadmap the right roadmap? But at the same time, it's not the only way to do it, right? I mean, proactive, you were talking about knowing and understanding your network. In a company the size of, PayPal, your former company, or others, I mean, you're global, you're everywhere. You've got servers all over the world. You've got data, different privacy policies, different cybersecurity guidelines and laws. How does all of that translate into managing something so large and so vast? How does that challenge really fit into cyber? Because a lot of people aren't talking about it, but Marriott was a classic example of huge organizations. It was huge. And these guys had, you look at their breach and you go 500 million people, but they're international. PayPal is no different. How do you start to wrap your head around that if you're a CISO of a Fortune company that has a global presence?
Yeah, it's really setting up your defense structure to respond, right? So instead of having a flat structure, you have first, second, third lines of defense. And these three teams work in unison to identify, do we have M&A activity that could be attacked? Do we have press that is going to have activists come after us? Operationally, are we scanning to make sure that we're doing blocking and tackling correctly? Do we truly understand our attack surface? Have we done analysis to say, do we have new gaps? What's internal audit finding? What are external auditors finding? Have we addressed those things? So at any point in time, what's the current state? And looking at that, what do you need to do to be proactive in making sure that those areas are being addressed until you can remediate them or until you can put the proper risk controls in. Now I'm going to get back to it being risk-centric. So if you're not risk-centric, you're probably not doing a good job today. If you haven't been able to be mature enough to identify and quantify what is actually, from a governance perspective, from your business perspective, that you're doing the right security for your business, you're going to put yourself in jeopardy and your company in jeopardy.
Is it really, I always say a company is a victim of a crime when they're breached. There's just no other way around it. And we tend to, everyone has a complaint about the media. I'm not going to go down that route of people talking about, media is a problem. I think media is misinformed when it comes to specific things. They want to report a headline that's going to generate, it's the clickbait rather than the informational stuff. Is it reasonable for people to expect companies in the Fortune, 100 or 200, the large scale organizations, to really be able to deflect 100% of the attacks that come their way?
I don't think, so defenders have to get it right all the time, right?
Right.
The attacker has to, they can get one thing right and they're in. Here's the dilemma I have. Those Fortune 200, 100 companies have the budgets to be able to better prepare their networks for reducing the amount of time somebody's in and identifying them faster. But that's not a focus today. One of the questions I'm starting to ask is if the CEO understood that having a tighter attack surface, having better security was a competitive advantage, would it benefit security? Would they see security differently? If it was put in a business term of it being competitive to be more secure or to have better security posture than your competitors. And if we go back to PayPal, one of their promises was security.
Right.
That's a brand promise, right?
You kind of bring up a very valid point. You know, I did this research for a series we're doing called Beyond the Breach, and we were studying the JP Morgan Chase breach from 2014. And a key thing was at the time when JP Morgan Chase was breached, they were spending $250 million a year on security, by far outspending most of their competitors, you know, 5 years ago in terms of cybersecurity budgets. They were still hacked. I think a lot of CEOs always kind of refer to that, at least in conversations they've had with me, when they go, well, these guys are spending, you know, 250, 300 million. They still couldn't stop it. So tell me why should I spend as much or more? What would be your answer to someone who would say that?
Well, what was that 250 million spent on? You can say it's a security bucket, but was it spent on basic blocking and tackling, really understand those things we've already talked about, those really understanding your network, understanding, you know, at any point in time where your threats were and what you should be focused on? Or were you just sort of, we're going to install these tools, all these tools are awesome, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and we're relying on them to provide our security. And right now, they're putting us at this level, and we're good with that. We accept that risk. But then not knowing you have all of these blind spots where somebody is in your network and they're doing lateral escalation and they're figuring out where your data is, and they've got themselves embedded and they're waiting for the right moment to start exfiltrating the data. It gets back to, you can spend a lot of money, but how are you spending that money? If you're not spending it on your people and making sure the talent is up to snuff, you know, they're the right talent and they have the right motivations and the right imagination to know what the behaviors of an attacker are. So if you're focused on signatures and not tactics and behaviors of the hacker, you could spend a lot of money and still miss, right?
Right. You know, there's a key challenge today in large and even small size organizations when you talk about all the different applications that companies use within their system. The Citrix breach was a prime example of kind of a centralized app security space that once they were breached, it kind of escalated and cascaded down to a series of other organizations. How do you overcome the challenges of app security and launching them before, you know, I mean, today when an app is launched, and I'm sorry, I kind of lost my focus there on that question for a second, but it's one of those where, you know, you're a VP or a CISO in an organization on cyber. You know, the technical team comes and says, hey, we're launching this app tomorrow. Check it out for us. How do you start addressing security from the ground up rather than being reactive? Because again, I think that goes into the proactive, reactive mindset that you were talking about earlier.
All right, so the first realization is, from a business, our developers are not prepared to address security. They went to school, they learned code. They learned how to code in the enterprise. They learned how to use automation tools. They learned how to use containers. Security was not a track that was part of their security training. So how do you address that? Lunch and learns. You sit down, you talk to developers, and you say, have you heard of OWASP? Do you understand what the top 10 are? And then you take some code samples of stuff that you scanned and you show them firsthand, real time, pull that app up and run an attack against it and show them what can happen, and then watch their reaction. And then, so you put it to them in a real term. So that's the first step, is proactively approach your developers and say, we want to help you to secure your apps. Here's the tools. Here's a local resource in your OWASP organization that will come in and talk to you, that you can go to, that will help you understand security.
What was the pushback on something like that? Did you get any pushback? I mean, after all, developer time's valuable. I mean, and most developers feel like they can write code better than God.
So here's the deal. You provide lunch, you do it over their lunch hour, they show up, you do it one time, and you watch the positive feedback from that. You do it again, more people show up because they heard from the first group. They offered value to us. I didn't mind giving up my lunch for this. I learned something new today. I was able to ask something of InfoSec, and they actually sat down and talked to me about it. They gave me a solution. So these were all positive steps that they came back and they told their huddles, their teams, wow, these people were actually engaged with us. If you're a developer, that's something you want, right? You want to know that you're not going to be stopped by security, but that they want to actually understand you and they want to partner with you. Then it's working to get the apps installed in a DAST or a SAST automated scanning environment in their sprints, something that the team can actually execute. So it's very dependent on the code set that you're using, but get those set up and actually have those running. That then puts especially as we get to Agile and we get to DevOps model, it puts it in the hands of the developers to scan early in their cycle and to fix their stuff before it gets to the end stages. You have to do manual pen testing. So for your critical apps that have critical data that are outward facing, or if they're really sensitive data is inside and you're concerned about insider, get your red teams to test them, find your stuff there. And then I have two more, another way to do it is internal bug bounty or hackathons. So right. You think your developers don't have something to tell you. You think there aren't developers that have a security mindset. You don't think you have developers that maybe want to come into security, that want to show their chops. Do an internal bug bounty, do a hackathon. Now, you have to set this up. You have to set ground rules up. You have to understand what the business can tolerate, and you also have to understand how much might come back to you that you have to then vet. And because if you ask them to do this, then you're not really don't have enough structure in place, and you're not ready to respond to them and tell them, hey, we looked at this. Yeah, it is a vulnerability, or no, this is a false positive, and here's why. Then you haven't done yourself any favors, right? Because you did this, but then you didn't do the follow through and validate it. And when they find something, you should reward them in some way. That's up to leadership to figure out how they want to reward them, but there should be something that you do for people that find really egregious things that you can identify and then fix that you didn't know about previously. And then find developers on teams that have a security passion or that have a security mindset, and put them in roles where they are at the deploy or check-in stage. And when code gets checked in, they have to validate it before it can go to deployment. They're engaged now because they're part of the developers to actually say, your code isn't up to snuff. Take it back and rework it. So this is now a developer telling a developer, you've got some. They can educate each other and then rotate people in that role over time. So make them own their security, put it in their hands. When that's happened, they're motivated because they also have other people that want them to get stuff out quick. And they know full well that if they don't do security in the right stages early on, and it happens at the end because of scan caught something, they're going to have to go explain to management there's a risk conversation. We have to put this app out, but we have these things that audit's going to talk to us about. If we have to fix those, it takes longer for the business to get that product out. So it impacts the business cycle.
You bring up a very, very, very good point, which is, you have to think outside the box.
Right.
And you have to find different ways to engage people. And when you and I spoke, one of the very first times you and I spoke, you said, if we all think in this one box, if we're all going through school, these certs, all these different ways, and they're all programming everyone to think in just one box, no wonder hackers are so darn successful at what they do. And I mean, this all, again, goes to mindset. How do you start to change the mindset within security so that, like you said, we're more proactive than reactive? We're looking at better solutions, at better things that we can build internally within our security teams, but it also helps the industry as a whole to evolve.
Yeah. It's your people again, right? So we have to understand there's so much to this to unwrap. It's an onion, really. You have to keep peeling back the layers. So
it's a blooming onion at Outback.
Yes. So it's education. It's kind of what you're doing right now. It's a lot of how podcasts and blogs are helping to change the conversations to, guys, wake up. This isn't how we should do it. If we keep repeating ourselves and we keep failing at it, how does that make us look? If we keep going after the same vendors that make the same promises and we don't get what we ask from them, why?
I'll tell you why, because no one's ever been fired for hiring PwC, although they should be, right? Than hiring a CyberHub Academy or, a smaller, consulting firm, because they go, my risk at PwC is much lower. That's how I keep my job than I would if I hired someone who actually knows what he's talking about.
Right. Yep. So what's the mentality for somebody that understands that? Is it somebody from a technology background, or is it maybe somebody that came from a non-technology background that kind of what you were talking about, that understands criminal behavior, that understands analysis, that understands if you are going to ever employ anything that's machine learning or AI or any of that, that understands, static, any of your configurations and your long-term data. People are going to provide for us. They're going to tell us if our tools are functional or non-functional. They're going to tell us where we have gaps. We have to bring people in that can think beyond technology, that can think about how the behavior of people are going to impact us, how they might approach things internally, even how our tools are working. Our tools have abilities to be modified, to be configured. Do they work for us, or do they work kind of in a tension with us? Are we always at odds? Do the teams have more complaints about the tools than they do, positive things to say about it? If so, that's an opportunity for us to go back to the vendor and say, here's our struggle with your tool. Here's what we need it to do. How do we get there? So we'll get back to that. It's pulling back all the layers. So there's the tools that we have. Are we leveraging right? What I love is the whole tool fatigue. So how many tools are in our environment? How many tools are conflicting with one another? How many tools are not implemented properly?
Speaking my language.
We don't even understand it.
No, we don't. And then you've got to hire people to manage specific tools. So not only are you getting a tool implemented, you've got to hire multiple people to manage this tool, so it's even draining more resources rather than solving them.
And then what does that tool generate? And is it just noise, or is it actionable intel? So if it's configured wrongly, or it's not addressing what your team needs, it's going to be noise. And we talk about like burnout in the SOC, burnout in incident response and in forensics. Does it have to be that way? I don't think it needs to be that way. I think the real promise for like machine learning is not everything they're selling it for today. It's really about, in my mind, it's automating the known things and allowing your team to focus on the things that are anomalies that come into the network that we already know are operating right, that looks weird, that looks odd, that trickle my interest. So if you're so bent on the tool's not working for me, or looking at all these logs, and you don't have time to actually like poke around the network and say, how are things looking today? What's my health look like today? And start having some imagination about what could be happening, and actually allow the team to spend maybe that time they spent chasing false positives to actually following leads on the network, following activity that is, they think is aberrant. We have missed opportunities out there. We're laying them on the table every day about how we manage our teams. And are you going to have a more engaged team if they can actually follow things that they're concerned about or they know about? Believe me, they know about things in your network that you don't know. If you allow them to go pursue those and actually find solutions for them, they'll be better for it, rather than just saying, no, go focus on this tool because that's what I hired you for.
There's I'm starting to see a trend where, you bring up a very good point, which some companies have 100, 150 tools. Some have 80, 20, it doesn't matter. They've got an unspecified amount of tools. Some of these tools require a specialized workforce to handle it. If you don't fully implement the tool, if the tool isn't really adapted to your environment, if you're unable to identify properly your network and how the tool should be working on your network, then you're pretty much spending money on something that could be absolutely useless, just create noise and drain resources from a company. I'm starting to see a trend of people and organizations actually developing their own tools internally, meaning they're going to a group of developers, which you had mentioned earlier, and saying, hey, this is a problem we have. Then the developer goes, none of this stuff really works for us, but here's what we can do to really solve it. And InfoSec comes in and adds their piece, and all of a sudden you've got a functioning tool for the entire company. Have you seen that trend, and do you feel like that trend's really going to start to take off as security starts to get more and more kind of all over the place?
Yeah, I think that's where hackathons have a huge value, is you have teams that come together and they offer solutions like that.
Right.
And then the business is able to vet them. So what does this do for a hacker? He comes in and he comes across a solution he knows nothing about. He can't go out there and read up on the web. He can't go watch demos from these vendors and figure out how they're addressing a security and what their holes might be. It gives you an advantage in having something that a hacker may not know, that might spend more time trying to figure out how to get around this, or figure out what it looks like, or is this a honeypot? Is it something I need to be worried about? So it could just be enough to give them pause, and that might be enough time for you to then see that there's somebody poking around that you wouldn't have seen before, because now they're being thoughtful about that, not just going in because I know what I'm doing, now I have to figure out what I'm doing. And believe me, one of the things I love as a hacker is studying all the research and all the literature out there by these vendors, because I know then what do I have to do to bypass it? I have to modify my attack, and then I'm in.
Do you feel like that's the weakness in cyber, is you have vendors that say, we stopped this? So, hackers look like you and I, Don. They're no different. They can still walk around to RSA. They can create a fake or shell company. They can pretend to be someone they're really not. You wouldn't know the 2 bits of it if you're not that educated, and that kind of gives you a leg in. Are we really is security becoming so mainstream, so much noise that we're really making the life of the hacker so much easier?
I think in a way that's true. So if you're an enterprise business, who are your people who are most likely to click through on something? Your sales and marketing people, because they're generating leads, they're actually trying to identify new products.
Right.
Now you're putting them out in the field and you're putting them in front of potentially social engineers or people who are interested in learning about that technology for espionage, for hacking, for whatever it would be. There's potential for that. I mean, I go back to like Clifford Stoll and the cuckoo's nest or the egg. I can't remember so he had to write the code to actually track down what was happening with his attacker, right? So he developed automated technologies for him to start tracking this. That wasn't a bad thing. That later ballooned into a full product. I don't know if we're going to get away from it, but this might be a good thing for the small, medium business that can't afford the tools. There's developers that are semi-retired. There's hackers for charity that if you come in and say, what I'd really like is just, what can you give me that has a small interface that I can use to secure my network, that I know that I have visibility on my network? That's the first thing. Do I have visibility? Do I know when something's happening? Maybe that's a way to approach this.
Well, don't you think the vendors in the marketplace ought to start realizing that going after enterprise is, I think, what is it? You have like 150 vendors vending for one enterprise business to solve, one common problem. And they're all, emailing the CISOs, the VPs. They're just trying to get a meeting, a foot in the door. They're sitting at conferences and presenting and talking about all these different things. What I found really interesting when I was at RSA or when I go to any other show is, as I'm walking around, no one's really vetting me to talk to me about what they do. They're just happy to talk to me. I think people assume that when you're at a show, the show organizers are responsible for vetting the people that come in. They're not.
Right.
Their job is to bring people in, not vet them. Your job is to vet them before you talk to them. And I found it very, very comical at RSA this year to realize that I could have been anything or anyone, but I was able to get, different weaknesses and vulnerability points. I was able to know who uses what company's tools, because guess what? They tell you, what? You want to know how big we are? These guys use us. And you're like, oh, wow. Thank you so much. And like you said, sales and marketing people, their job is to go out there and sell. And what's the best way to sell? Someone else is doing this, right? Someone else is using us. And if I'm a hacker, really, it's not that hard for me to do social engineering today. Right. I could just go and talk to the vendors, pretend to be someone I'm not.
So, as an employer's perspective, we ask our employees not to put on specific technologies, specific tools on their social profiles. But then what do we do as a corporation? We allow these vendors to promote us. It would be much better for business if we told the vendors, we're available to talk to other CISOs. I don't want any publicity on your websites, but if you want to, and this would be more effective than splashing a name up. I'll let another CISO or another executive talk to me because I like your tool. And it's going to be more authentic because they're going to be able to give the reality of, well, if they fail the implementation and they think they've got a great tool, maybe it's not going to be a great conversation, right, with another CISO. But they can at least tell them, here's our experience with the company, real.
So what you're talking about right now, sorry, I'm going to put you on the spot here, Don, for a second.
Sure.
I'm a big proponent of, in my previous, before I got into security, I was in sales and marketing. And my partner, Corinne, who you've spoken with as well,
Yep.
We had a company in Israel and we were helping startups kind of, get out there. And it could have been financial, security, you name it, whatever.
Yep.
And one of the key things when I study sales and marketing and I study cybersecurity, I compare security to pharmaceuticals. And I'll tell you why. CISOs and doctors are two very, very, very busy people.
Mm-hmm.
Getting time with them, even if it's 10 minutes, is a gift all of within itself. We rely on what you just said. The way pharmaceutical industry, the way people were able to get, the way Pfizer was able to get Viagra to become the ultimate drug, beyond the fact that it gives you a hard-on for 4 hours, allegedly, right? Is the fact that they had other doctors recommending it to other doctors, right? And that kind of helped spread the word, but no one really stopped for a second and paused and looked at the medication to say, well, this only doesn't just do this, it can do so much more. Let's really look at it. And there's a whole story, there's a book written about it, and I'll tell you, I can't remember it off the top of my head, but it was a doctor who, what I like to call him, he's the white hat CISO. He's the guy who says, listen, I respect my peers, but some of my peers, we're all overwhelmed. We're all overworked. We're all understaffed. We're all have less budget than what we want. And these security vendors come in, and sometimes, they're using a peer who really doesn't completely understand a product, because as you and I know, there are different CISO roles out there. You've got the policy CISOs, and these guys are into govern. They're not really tech guys, right? Mm-hmm. But if you put a policy guy with a tech guy, it's going to be a conversation that no one understands, because the policy guy is going to be like, I don't understand any of this. And the tech guy is going to be like, I don't understand how you're a CISO.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Because you have to understand technology to understand policy. But I've been able to map out the different CISOs that serve in different organizations with their core specialties, right? Because their core specialties are in those specific areas where these folks are just out there. And you're starting to see this trend become in cyber, where you're saying, oh, well, if you don't write Viagra, this doctor does, and this doctor is a world-renowned doctor. He speaks at every convention and every little, piece about this specific problem, and he only writes Viagra. Well, that'd be no different than a CISO going on every conference stage and talking about product X. And I won't say a vendor name because I don't give them free press, but they got to earn it. And so with that being said, it's great to have a CISO community, but then how does every product fit into a specific network? And that goes back to your very basic, the first layer of the onion that you were talking about, which is how do we make sure that we know where our data is, we know how our network is mapped out, and we have visibility? Because you can have the greatest product on the world, but if it doesn't fit your network, are you really going to go and restructure everything to put in one vendor? Or are you going to keep looking to find something that fits in your network and your cyber posture? Or are you going to develop it on your own, and that might be cheaper?
There's another piece to this conversation that's getting back to the RSAs and all the vendor fairs. And the fact that it's just not your CISOs and your decision makers, but it's also technologists that go to these. So they come back and they're not happy with the tool they have, but they read about, heard about, were given a quick demo of the shiny tool at this conference. So they now start pushing to their management, why don't we use this tool? And it gets into a point where they're doing it just because they want relief in their job and they want a better tool. It may not be a better tool. It may just be the tool they have isn't done, isn't properly configured or isn't the right tool to start with. It may not be you need a tool at all in either case. But do we allow for that tool to come in? Do we allow for there to be two POCs, one with the current people that own it doing it, another one with those same people? Because they're going to it's going to be biased. They're going to say the tool we have sucks. They're going to give all the reasons they know, and they're not going to be. So if you're going to do POCs, I almost think you need to bring in two outside or however many people outside, just hire contractors. Come in and do an apples to apples comparison. Here's the tool we have now. Look at it, evaluate it. Here's one we want to buy. Look at it, evaluate it. Keep the bias as much as you can out of it, because inside the organization, believe me, there's parties at factions that want whatever tool. You're not going to get the best tool at the end of the day.
Right. I mean, you're not. You nailed it on the head, which is the factions within organizations, right? If I get to you, I'll get to your number 3, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, whoever under the line. I'll start creating advocates, But that's how drug companies did it. That's why I compare pharmaceutical sales to cybersecurity vendors, but then they bring, they use the different methods of getting meetings, whether it be, an event, a shiny object, and to try to get you in somewhere where they're able to kind of, tell you about their great new shiny tool. I see this all the time, and it kind of goes to the whole point of, our workforce shortage that people keep talking about, right? Yeah. A workforce shortage that to me doesn't really exist. And I'll tell you, you and I started when we were offline talking about, I know of so many InfoSec people and departments that have been essentially let go since the start of the year that still haven't been picked up as widely as people anticipated. We're into the second quarter of the year now. That's been an issue. And I think part of workforce shortage, and I'll go back to pharmaceutical, on Thursday I was having beers with someone, and I'm going to give this example. This isn't a question, Don, but I kind of want to put this idea out there, and I want you to think about it and answer it if you feel like it. If you remember in the 60s and 70s, people were talking about a nursing shortage, right? Mm-hmm. We don't have enough nurses. We don't have enough nurses. We don't have enough nurses. And as the 80s came along, they still didn't have enough nurses. And heck, when Obamacare was passing through, we didn't have enough nurses. We're always short of nurses. Yet, there's so many people in nursing school, and there's so many nurses out there who have a nursing degree and no work. And a very good friend of mine, Kevin Peterson, he did this research, and he shared it with me on Thursday while we were having beer. So I can't take credit for it. This is all him, but I am adapting it, and I'm giving him the credit for it. He did some research, and he looked at it from a standpoint of nursing versus cybersecurity, drew the graph, and then he looked at how did the hospitals, clinics serve the nursing shortage. Well, they automated. They outsourced. He went exactly to what you were just talking about. You want to add a new tool, outsource it, bring someone in, or automate it. We're starting to see more automation tools come up in cyber. Vendors are starting to lower prices due to competition, so stuff is becoming more affordable. I think there's going to be a consolidation in the vendor market within the next 3 to 5 years. I did a whole podcast about that in Hebrew, and since you don't know Hebrew, I couldn't take you to listen to it. But Nir Valtman and myself had a podcast where we're talking. We ended up going 2 full episodes about me arguing at the fact that we're going to see a 10 big companies in cyber who are going to corner the market, and they're going to acquire a bunch of smaller companies and integrate them into an overall solution where they can go to a CISO and, like you just said, say, we have everything you could want. The only thing we don't cover are these 4 things. Mm-hmm. Right? Because I feel like when you look at AT&T or Verizon, Google, Amazon, Cisco, IBM Security, Checkpoint, Palo Alto, these big companies that have been doing this for a while, they're starting to buy and consolidate. Buy and consolidate. Checkpoint used to be firewall only. Today you go to talk to anyone from Checkpoint. We're not just a firewall company. We're everything, right? IBM Security, the same thing. They're not only, IBM anymore. They're IBM Security, and they have training, and they do all these different things. And you're starting to see the market consolidate. Amazon and AWS, they're taking over all the cloud security and everything that has to do with it. Anything that comes out of cloud security, Amazon's looking at, getting them in the door, and trying to look at it. Strategically, when I look at it from a business point of view, I'm saying this market in 3-5 years, RSA will never be as big as it was this year. It won't have 2 or 3 halls at Moscone. It just won't. It'll be 1, maybe 1.5 halls. You'll have maybe 250 to 300 vendors. Maybe. And I say that because I feel like this market is going to have to go into consolidation. Because when you talk to CISOs, they're overwhelmed. There's so many vendors. Nothing unites it. You don't have one dashboard to control everything. You have multiple dashboards you have to look at for visibility and everything else. That's technology today in cyber. I feel like that's where we're heading. I think that's the cry of enterprise. How do you translate security to business folks, and how do you build trust? And the bigger companies, the Amazons, the IBMs, the ones that don't only just know the CISO, they know the CIO, the CEO, the CTO, the CFO. They know everyone because they have those relationships. They're now planting those seeds of, we can be your one-stop shop for security.
Right.
We can really give you 85% of what you need. And you trust us because you've already worked with us. Your CTO works with us. Your CIO works with us. We're already your approved vendor. So what do you have to lose? Do you see what I see, or am I just standing on a hill screaming help and no one's looking?
So I can see that happening, but I can also see enterprise running from that, screaming. I'll be frank. A lot of the Israeli companies are coming to the US with super innovative technologies that work.
Right.
I won't name any, but we brought one in that did soft breaches at our endpoints. Amazing technology, visually amazing technology. Allowed you to visualize what was going on. Again, if I can see what's happening on my network and I really understand where my vulnerable points are, I'm better for it. I'm not going to get that innovation from the big company. They're going to take these small companies up and they're going to stifle their innovation. They're just going to give us their same core product because it sells and it's cheaper. Are they really going to invest in building out that acquisition, or are they just going to throw that technology in?
Yes.
You know, so it won't serve us. There may be that for a while, and then we're going to say it didn't serve us, and hopefully we have the awareness to go throw it out the window. Let's go back to the small man that actually can solve the problem.
So you're saying what Nir Valtman said. He goes, I don't think these big companies can stifle innovation. To which I'm going to go back to the pharmaceutical industry. Pharmaceutical industries invest a ton in R&D. I think the difference that we're going to see in this R&D is it's going to be more university-based, like how most pharmaceutical companies today do it, because that's cheap labor. It's a great way to invest, $500 million and come up with 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different drugs that you can take to market over your own R&D department where you have to pay 50 people, 6+ figures a year, right? I think these big companies actually have a plan for it. And you're right. They're going to stifle some innovation. You're absolutely right. Google bought Waze. For what reason? Everyone thought when Google bought Waze, they were going to integrate Waze into Google Maps. Did they do that? No. They left Waze as a standalone product. They only started investing again in Waze when they noticed that more people were going to an older version of Waze than a newer version of Google Maps because Waze was still better. Eventually, the market will demand and the enterprise will have to answer, right? But the challenge you have with the small vendors, and I know a lot of great small vendors that have really good products, right? Mm-hmm. And it's great that you're a member of a small Israeli company that came and brought you that solution. And if they're good and you want to say their name, you can, you should, because that's the point of this podcast. It's to give good companies that are giving good opportunities that come with a recommendation like yours, the platform where they get that free press, right? And the big thing with it is when you look at how the market kind of starts to correlate, it ends up going to what you started talking about. This whole conversation, as we kind of roll around this wheel and where we've gone, we've ended up where we started. How do you talk to executives? How do you get the business folks to buy into security? How do you explain ROI? How do you explain budget? When we talked about JP Morgan Chase, you asked a very, very, very smart question. How were they spending the $250 million? Mm-hmm. Very few people have ever responded when I say that with that question. Very, very, very few don't. They just don't, right? People think 250 million, they must have had every product on the planet. Really? Would you necessarily agree with that? I don't know. Right? They now, immediately after they got breached, their CEO, Jamie Dimon, right, said, I'm doubling our cybersecurity budget. Just like that, they went from 250 to $500 million.
And what they had didn't work, so let's double down.
Right.
And my first thought would have been, what we had wasn't working. So I want to have a few models, implement a couple models across, because I'm a global organization, so I can do this. I can do A, B, C technologies and staffing, and I can see what provides the most fruit. Why not take advantage of my scale? We're not working smart in security. It's like we still have our training wheels on. We're figuring out, we're playing on the playground. We're still having these fights, and we let the vendors kind of push us around and sell us these half-baked solutions, and they're not mature. If they were mature, they would ensure when I got that product and I got it in them, my implementation was spot on, that it was working for me. That's not happening.
Well, it's not happening for a variety of reasons. And it's not always the vendor's fault, because some companies take a product from a vendor and say, thank you, we've got it from here, we're going to handle it, right?
We're the experts.
Right, we're the experts. Vendors stay at the door, thank you, here's your check, here's your money, go. And what ends up happening is the product isn't fully implemented, and then they have an event.
Right.
And they call the vendor and they go, this is all your fault. And the first thing the vendor goes is, well, let's talk about your implementation of the product, because the product should have stopped this from happening. Yep. And so I think this all boils down to the lack of, I don't want to say education, but like you said, we're still biking with our training wheels on our bikes. We're still letting people push us around, and whether the vendors or a specific interest, we don't know how to have a business conversation about cyber.
True. Yeah, very true.
We don't know how to do that. We can't. I know maybe a handful of CISOs that I know that when they go and talk to the board, they're able to talk business. A handful. And I know quite a few. I'm not going to say I know all of them, but I know quite a few CISOs. But I think only a handful are able to really have a business conversation. I think that's where our challenge lies, is we don't have that conversation. We're not having the right conversation. We're not training our cyber folks to know business.
No. Or to understand the role of governance in business, right? Because governance is their ally. The business aligns to governance. If you can align to governance, and I'll get back to, can you show your CEO, can you show your board how you being secure is a competitive advantage? Not just a marketing ploy, but if you and your industry are not breached, or you're breached, but you can show where you stopped it before it got to your data, how much better are you, and how much more trust are you going to get than the 10 companies around you that all got breached and didn't know until it was 100 days in, 200 days in, and all the data's gone. Never to come back, right? So,
well, once data's gone, it's gone. I love the people who say, I'm going to go after the hackers and get my data back. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
You're not getting your data back.
All you'll understand is for sure what data maybe was lost. But you should, hopefully you
should know that already.
You know that from whatever was exfiltrated, that you have those logs, but that's not even the case sometimes.
No, it's not. It's fascinating. Don, I want to say thanks for coming on the podcast. I really do appreciate it. Long time coming, but I finally got you on.
Yep.
How can people get a hold of you? How can people touch base with you? What's the best way for them?
My LinkedIn profile is where I do most of my blogging. And I'll probably start getting active on Twitter. So if it's just Don Pecha.
Pecha.
Yep. At Don Pecha on Twitter, and then Don Pecha on LinkedIn.
Awesome. I want to say thanks for coming on the podcast, helping us think outside the box a little bit more. We'd love to have you on more often when you're available.
Yeah, absolutely.
Enjoy Lincoln. Is it spring yet in Omaha, Nebraska?
Yeah, the sun's actually coming out today, so awesome.
The snow's melted away, sun's coming out.
Yeah.
And Warren Buffett's eating at a McDonald's.
Yes.
Thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate it. Just hang tight. We're just gonna give a few messages real quick before we end this. So, CyberHub Engage, you can follow us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play. We are one of the fastest growing cybersecurity podcasts in the country. So make sure you tune in. Make sure you check out our new series, Goodbye Privacy, where we expose how the data cartels are abusing us online, folks. Make sure you look up Goodbye Privacy after this podcast. And if you're not a CyberHub Engage supporter on Patreon and you're really not helping us to produce this content, shame on you. So make sure you go to patreon.com/CyberHub Engage, get some of our free swag, get different ways to interact with us here at the CyberHub Engage team. We really appreciate it. Don Pecha, the up-and-coming rising star of the cybersecurity industry. He was here first, folks, so I just want to make this crystal clear. In a year from now where he's keynoting somewhere and people say, where's he been hiding? CyberHub Engage. All right? Don, thanks for being on the show again. Everyone, thanks for listening and watching. We really do appreciate it. My name is James Azar. You're listening to the CyberHub Engage podcast, and we'll be back after this message.
Our podcast and our audience continues to grow. And to fuel that growth even more, we're looking for sponsors. We're looking for companies that want to associate their brand with security, with our community as it continues to grow, not only here domestically as the fastest growing cybersecurity podcast in the country, but also globally. Go to our website, www.cyberhubengage.com, and download our media kit for more information. We would love to discuss how we can bring you on board. Again, cyberhubengage.com. Check out our media kit and be part of the fastest growing cybersecurity podcast in the country today.